We're reading from Psalm 31. We're not reading the whole psalm, so we'll start off with verses 1 to 10, and then I think it's 14 to 16, and then 19 to the end of the psalm if anyone is following with a real Bible or even a virtual Bible. Okay, let's read together. This is the Psalm of David, and I can't read. There's something of music. For the director of music. In you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead me and guide me. Keep me free from the trap that is set for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Deliver me, Lord, my faithful God. I hate those who cling to worthless idols. As for me, I trust in the Lord. I will be glad and rejoice in your love. For you saw my affliction and knew the anguish of my soul. You have not given me into the hands of the enemy, but have set my feet in a spacious place. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me. Let your face shine on your servant. Save me in your unfailing love. How abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all on those who take refuge in you. In the shelter of your presence, you hide them from all human intrigues. You keep them safe in your dwelling from accusing tongues. Praise be to the Lord, for he showed me the wonders of his love when I was in a city under siege. In my alarm I said, I'm cut off from your sight. Yet you heard my cry for mercy when I called to you for help. Love the Lord, all his faithful people. The Lord preserves those who are true to him, but the proud he pays back in full. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord.
Morning, everyone. Just dawned on me, this is, I think it's the first talk that I've done since the mask mandate. It's strange, it reminds me of that time that I addressed a ninja convention. It still takes like a little bit of getting used to, not being able to see people's faces, full faces. It's great to have you with us this morning, particularly if you're a visitor. I'd like to extend a special welcome to you. This talk, it's a bit of a one-off, I suppose. It's not part of a series. The plan is that as the year proceeds, we'll embark on our kind of regular sermon series as normal. But today, I really just wanted to kind of, I suppose, set the scene, if you like, for the year that is to come. January is obviously over. Holidays are done for most of us. Kids are either back at school or very soon to be back at school. 2021 has passed, and now 2022 has opened up before us. And my son's Nintendo game console, it broke about a week ago. It just won't turn on, it just won't power up at all. And hoping to avoid an overtly expensive fix, I spent a lot of time Googling and YouTubing DIY ways to go about addressing it. And most of the sites that I visited and most of the suggestions were about doing what they call a hard reset. So you hold down the right buttons in the right sequence for just the right amount of time, and the device will erase all its game history, its profile, your presets, your highest and lowest scores. It frees up all the memory, cleans out the junk, and does a full restore to factory settings with all the clean slate and potential that comes with that. That's a hard reset. And I've often wished that with the turn of the calendar page from December over to January, that just that alone would bring about the equivalent of a hard reset. The same kind of magic reboot and fresh start that comes with pushing the right buttons. But of course, for us, it's just not that simple. 1 year and everything that came with it bleeds into the present year and the year to come. But despite this, it still seems to be like a good and natural time to take stock, to reflect, maybe re-examine some of the resolutions and aspirations for the year to come. It's Louis and I's anniversary soon, wedding anniversary, and this is something based on some advice we got years and years and years ago. I'm sure plenty of other couples do it. It's something that we try to do annually at this time. Sit down, reflect on the year that's been, do a kind of review, have a pray and a think and a dream about what we should be focusing on for the next 12 months. But before we get taken up and down with the details, we always try to kind of set the scene, if you like, for the year that is to come. So what's going on in the background of our lives that's going to influence our plans, our goals, and our aspirations? And this talk is really trying to set that scene for MCC in 2022. So before we get into the details of ministries and new ideas for the church, what's going on in the kind of general background of our lives? What's the backdrop, if you like, that's probably going to influence what we do as individuals, family, and as a church? And I'd suggest that, if you like, the big background theme of 2022 is one of general uncertainty. And that uncertainty makes it very difficult to plan and predict just about anything. Our family, and no doubt we're not alone here, our family experienced this on day four of 2022. We had plans for a summer break that ended up turning into 3 weeks of isolation, just like that. So, if uncertainty is the theme of 2022, I'm going to suggest some reasons for it and some suggestions as to how to handle that, both as individuals and as a church. Because, and this is really important, because regardless of the uncertainty and how real that is, we still need to plan. We need to make goals, if you like. We need to have aspirations. If we don't have any plans, then that itself becomes a plan by default. So we need to have some guidelines about how to set those goals and plans despite the challenges of uncertainty. So here we go, some factors behind that general uncertainty. Now, the big and obvious one is COVID. And we're already starting to see how this affects us week to week, particularly when it comes to Sunday morning services. People can't as reliably turn up to help out on rosters as they did before. And this morning's been a great case in point. Joel was all lined up and ready to go, but then started just feeling sniffly yesterday evening and had to pull a pin on both this and the paid gig that he has after this. So they may be isolating. People may be isolating. People may not be as likely to attend full stop because they're doing the right thing, staying at home and not exposing people to the possible symptoms they have. And then there's the masks. It's necessary, but it still feels kind of off-putting, at least to me. It's harder to sing, it's harder to hear people, it's harder to see and read people's facial expressions, and some people find them really stifling, as in really physically uncomfortable, almost nauseating. And this is understandably going to put people off. And it's easy to cope with when the weather's warm, we can go outside, mingle, have a drink and take them off. But it's going to prove more and more challenging as the weather deteriorates and gets colder. And it's going to make trying to run anything indoors here over the course of winter and autumn also kind of challenging. So there's a lot of worrying uncertainty just bundled up with COVID full stop. And then there's a COVID-related burnout, for want of a better term. I remember at the beginning of last year mentioning that lots of people seem to be tired, just tired, and really tired, spent almost, after a hard 2020. And my take is that this hasn't really stopped over the course of 2021. In fact, it seemed to actually catch up with a lot of people over 2021. Maybe this is you, and I suggest if it's not you, it's probably someone who you know, someone in your circles, quite suddenly realising that you feel exhausted or they feel exhausted. You don't have the same capacity that you used to. And maybe it's even got you questioning and reassessing some of the big choices that you've made in life, your job or career, your hobbies, your relationships. Sociologists are calling this the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation. As we recover from COVID, many professionals in good jobs, people who aren't living from paycheck to paycheck, they're leaving those good jobs as they come out of lockdown. Lockdown, quarantine, isolation, it's forced them. It's actually kind of given them the chance and the impetus to do a lot of soul searching, and they're realising just how spent and dissatisfied they are. So if people are understandably depleted thanks to COVID, it's going to likely make volunteering and participating in a community like ours more and more difficult. You may not have the energy to see people or get to events like a Sunday morning with any kind of regularity. It might take you everything you've got just to get out of bed and keep the wheels of regular life turning. There's not much left over for voluntary groups and activities like church. And again, I don't know how you found it, but the levels of my kind of continual background anxiety have ratcheted up a couple of notches, courtesy of a lot of factors other than COVID, just over the past 12 months. There's stuff going on the background in the world, like the possibility of Taiwan and the Ukraine being invaded, to the debates about religious freedom here in Australia, to the absolute tragedies that occurred in Devonport at the end of last year, all the way through to even relationship breakdowns in our own church community over the past 12 months. It's been a really tough year. And the risk is that with this kind of backdrop of anxiety and fear, it's easy to become just a little bit more stressed. And that stress in itself is debilitating as well. It can sap our energy, can sap our motivation, and sometimes lead us to avoid even leaving the house. Because when life in general seems to get that uncertain, fraught and scary, it's easy to stay with the familiar and non-risky. It's easy just to stay at home, hanging out mostly with the family and binge watching TV. It doesn't take that much energy and it's kind of comforting. But of course, it's not a great way to maintain the relationships needed for spiritual community. So there's a lot that we could worry and stress about. There's plenty of uncertainty staring us down in 2022. But that can't be the whole story, right? There's still things of comfort and encouragement that we can be certain of. And here are some suggestions as to what they are. We can be certain that God still has a role for us to play as a church here in Margate. So we can still be his collective ambassadors, a flawed but hopefully hopeful group of people who are trying to follow God's will on earth as it is in heaven. And again, we believe that we've been put here intentionally as a church in a particular way to be missionaries to a particular people and to serve and minister them in a particular manner. And that's a role that no one else can play. But critically, to play that role, we need to have the time. We need to make the time. Church involvement has to be one of those big rocks that we prioritise in our lives. And on that, whilst I'm certain that God wants to use us, can use us, it's going to be through our weaknesses as well as our strengths. It's going to be God using us through our limits as well as our ambitions. And the end result of how he uses us may not look like what we'd plan, if we were God. It might look radically different. I came across this book the other day, heard about it through some podcasts and some blogs and stuff. Great book. And it's called 4,000 Weeks. And it's called 4,000 Weeks because the author, a researcher, worked out that on average, we've got about 4,000 weeks worth of life over the course of an average lifespan now. 4,000 weeks is the average human lifespan, give or take some weeks. No guarantees, no money back. And in our context, in an Australian context, first world, middle to upper class, suburbanites, whatever, we're encouraged to fill those weeks up with more than we can possibly fit into 8,000 or 12,000 weeks. We've got bucket lists, we've got lifestyle hacks, we've got 5-year plans, we've got aspirational vision statements, we've got 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shopping, and a philosophy that tells us we can do just about anything, and we deserve just about anything if we only set our minds to it. If we just manage to put those big rocks into the jar first, and then add the pebbles and the sand, we can make everything fit. And maybe we even lean on proof texts like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But then we experience a time like this, and the truth becomes plain. I can't control my partner. I can't control my kids. I can barely control my appetites on a good day. I can't dictate my gene pool and all the predispositions it brings. And that bucket list, it's just endless. And yet, I'm not even supposed to leave the house today because I've got a sniffle, let alone summit Kilimanjaro. There are too many big rocks. They were never going to fit in the stupid jar in the first place, you know what I mean? There's just too many. And maybe, just maybe, doing all things through Christ actually means being given the strength to do all the things that Christ wants me to do, not all the things that I think I need to do. Maybe I need to hold that verse alongside with Christ's power is made perfect in my weakness. And I hope this doesn't sound like cold comfort, but there's some reassurance here. As individuals and as a church, we can overreach. The reasons may be noble. We may want to do our best and bring God glory. They may be not so noble. We might be vainly ambitious. We might be scared to fail. We don't want to think of our mortality, so we just try to keep ourselves busy and busy and busy and busy with all the plates spinning. But the end result is the same. We come up with plans, schemes, and that's not a bad thing. But then everything, our contentment, our feelings towards ourselves, towards others, our relationship with God, can start to rest on all those plans and schemes coming to perfect fruition. And that's the bad thing. So this isn't meant to be discouraging, but liberating. It's repeatedly realising that, again, as individuals and a church, we're not God. We're not God. We've got limits. We've got limits on our time. We've got limits on our energy. We've got limits on our capacity. We are finite, bounded creatures, not the Creator. And not acknowledging these limits, trying to push through them, this can seem pious, but it can also be just a holy veneer that's actually covering pride and arrogance. Church-wise, given our current climate of uncertainty, it probably means that we're conservative when it comes to the sheer number of ministries we run and endeavours that we try. We probably need to do less things and be really clear as to why we're doing them, and then try to do them to the best of our ability, whilst also remembering that God will work despite and through and around our limitations and weaknesses in often surprising and really encouraging ways. So we need to maintain a certain humility and realism, but at the same time, there's a complementary truth, and that is that we can't afford to get passive, fatalistic, and overwhelmed in the face of all this worrying uncertainty. I'm pretty certain that we're still called to do what we can with God's grace. We just don't cop out. We don't have a license just to shrug and say that it's all too hard. I find myself returning to this verse near the end of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. Stand firm, keep on labouring in the work of the Lord, and know that it's not in vain. What's the work of the Lord? It's going to look different for each of us, obviously. But generally, it's going to involve loving people, praying for them, encouraging them, being with them, listening to them and speaking the truth and love to them, and serving with your own God-given talents and capacity. So whilst we want to acknowledge our limitations and challenges on this hand, we still strive with the other. The Australian professor and author Sen Sendaja, he quoted St. Augustine, the great church father, and then paraphrased him. So Augustine's quote was, "Pray as though everything depended on God, work as though everything depended on you." And the paraphrase, "The best way to predict your future is to create it with all your might and then surrender it to God's might." And I really like that tension. Create your future with all your might. Work hard, throw yourself at it, but then surrender. Be completely prepared to give all that up, whatever that vision is, to God and his much mightier might. But you may understandably be feeling so overwhelmed, so busy or unsure right now about what the next 12 months looks like and where you're heading, that it's impossible to create your future on some grand scale. And if that's the case, where do we begin? Amongst all the options and the limitations, what do I actually do? And a really practical suggestion that's been made popular in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is just do the next right thing. Just do the next right thing. You can't do all the right things, you particularly can't do them all at once. You may not even be certain as to what the right things are. But we can normally recognise what the next right thing to do is. And in a church context, it might be as simple as turning up on a Sunday or checking in with someone during the week and seeing how they're doing. It might be talking to a friend about your faith or just reading some scripture and praying first thing in the morning when you get up. It's probably going to involve making church one of those rocks that you choose to fill your jar with. It may be the relatively normal stuff of day-to-day, week-to-week life. And that fits really nicely into that timescale that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow is going to worry about itself. What's the good that we can do right now? What's the change that we can make? What's the good that's probably right in front of us that we aren't doing? Remembering that anything that we do for God's glory counts. None of that is wasted and in vain. You want to make your life count, you want to make a difference. You could do worse than thinking of that quote attributed to Viktor Frankl. Not so much asking, what shall I do with my time? But instead, what does my time want to do with me? What does the time want to do with me? And trusting that God will provide opportunities for us right now. And finally, in terms of comfort and certainty, we can be certain about God's power and his goodness. And this it just rolls off the tongue so easily, but it's such a radical act. It's such a radical act of trust, having that faith that God is both good and powerful. And doing so in such a way that we actually orientate our lives around that. We live as if that is true, even though we struggle to believe it moment to moment. Our times may be uncertain and unpredictable, but go back to the words of David from Psalm 31. And this is just a snippet. Verse 7, I will be glad and rejoice in your love, for you saw my affliction and knew the anguish in my soul. 14, but I trust in you, Lord. I say you are my God. My times are in your hands. And verse 19, how abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all on those who take refuge in you. And 24, that really great conclusion. Be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. So here's the reality. God knows our affliction. He knows, as it says, the anguish of our souls. So we're not talking about escapism when it comes to Christianity. We're not talking about denial, trying to, I suppose, stick our head in the sands and just pretend that everything is going swimmingly. But even more importantly, our times, these incredibly uncertain times, are in God's hands. His capable, his loving, his powerful hands. So let's be strong given that and take heart together. Again, let's together be able to walk this line about being able to acknowledge our limitations, our weaknesses, our finitude on the one hand, but still, on the other, plan, act, dream, and if nothing else, just try to keep on doing the next right thing together with God's help and grace. Let me pray. Father, I thank you that our times really are in your hands. I thank you for your love, for your power, for your mercy. I thank you that you know us better than we know ourselves, and you're just so familiar with our anguish, with our uncertainty, with our pain. And I pray that you'll help us not be defined by that. I pray that you'll help us, whilst being able to acknowledge our weaknesses and our limitations, the very real human constraints that we all labour under. I pray that, Father, in your strength and with your help, we will be able to somehow transcend that and see our weaknesses serve as a means to bring you glory and honour, Father. And I pray that you'll help us, again, not be overwhelmed this year over the course of 2022 with all the unknowns. I pray that whilst not denying those, Father, you'll help us be able to make plans, have some vision, have some dreams, have some ambition, but again, not be unduly wedded to that. I pray that you will help us strive with everything that we can, whilst also having the humility to be able to hand all that over to you and to be able to say your will be done and mean it. Amen.